Good morning, guys. So I know you are all hard at work inventing your popsicles. For today's read aloud, I have a book called The Boo Boos That Changed the World, a true story about an accidental invention. So, this is the true story of how two people invented the Band Aid. And actually, this story is pretty fun because there's a couple of inventions that go into the process of making band-aids. So this is a really fun story. So when the story starts, there's no such thing as band-aids. If you were outside playing or in the house cutting with something sharp and you got cut, or you got a scraped knee or a boo-boo and you were bleeding, you'd have to just hold a towel to it or tissue or something like that. So we're going to see how these people fix that problem. Once upon a time, in 1917 actually, a cotton buyer named Earl Dixon married his beloved Josephine, and they lived happily ever after. The end. Actually, that was just the beginning. The newlyweds expected to live a quiet life in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Instead, Earl and Josephine ended up changing the world, one boo-boo at a time. You see, Josephine was accident prone. She often bumped and bruised herself while working around the house. But that was nothing compared to how often she injured herself in the kitchen. Ouch! When she sliced and diced an onion, she sometimes sliced her finger too. Boo hoo! When she grated cheese, she sometimes grated her knuckle. Ugh! When she lifted a hot pot off the stove, she sometimes burned her hand. After Josephine winced in pain, she quickly grabbed a rag to stop the bleeding. But with bulky towels in between her fingers, it was even harder for Josephine to hold a knife. She became even more accident prone. Impossible, you say? It's true. Josephine's klutziness had become a bloody problem. Every night, when Earl came home from work, he looked forward to talking with Josephine and eating the wonderful meal she had prepared. That was until he saw his beloved's hands. Yikes! Her cuts might get infected. He had to help his new bride. Earl's father was a doctor, so Earl knew a little bit about boo-boos and bandages, and luckily he worked for a company that manufactured hospital supplies. So he worked for a company that makes bandages. Earl knew there had to be a solution, but what was it? Earl thought while he shaved in the morning. Maybe if I... Earl thought while he bought cotton in the afternoon. Then I could... Earl thought some more while he laid in bed at night. That would solve... Finally, a light bulb went off over his head. I've got it, he yelled with excitement, waking up Josephine. What have you got? She asked. The bloody solution, of course, Earl replied. So this inventor is starting with the problem. The problem is that his wife Josephine keeps getting little cuts and bruises and scrapes on her hands, but there's no bandages easy that she can use to cover up her cuts. So he's going to invent a solution. The next morning, Earl tried out his idea. He took a long piece of tape and laid it on the kitchen sticky side up. And then he cut small squares of gauze and stuck them on the tape every few inches. He placed a material called crinoline on top of the adhesive to keep the whole strip sterile. That means clean. So he put a back on the sticker. It's perfect, Earl said proudly. Now, all Josephine had to do was cut off a piece of the longer strip and put it on. She didn't need anybody's help. She needed only one hand. It worked. At last, they lived happily ever after. The end. But wait. Here comes the part about how Earl and Josephine changed the whole world. Earl guessed there were probably hundreds of people, even thousands of people, who could benefit from his new invention. So Earl invented these really handy sticky bandages that his wife could use to quickly take care of her own boo-boos and cuts. Aren't there other people who get boo-boos and cuts? Couldn't they enjoy this too? So instead of keeping it all to himself, he decided to share it. Earl and Josephine thought about making the bandages themselves, but they soon realized it was too big a job. Earl told one of his coworkers about it, and the coworker encouraged Earl to meet with the company's president. At first, Earl's boss, James Johnson, wasn't quite sure that Earl's idea was good enough. Earl demonstrated how easy it was to put the bandage on, so Earl showed him, and then Mr. Johnson saw his own light bulb. The company agreed to produce and sell the product. They combined the words bandage and first aid to create the name Band-Aid. Now, Earl and Josephine would surely live happily ever after because Band-Aids were guaranteed to be an instant success. And with that, we have come to the end. Thank you and good night. Oops, not yet. Sorry, story's not over. All right, so Johnson is making these Band-Aids. The first year, Band-Aids were made in a factory. What do you notice in this picture about how they're being made? Somebody is doing it all by hand. It was slower than slow, and only a small number could be made by hand. They came rolled up and were 18 ridiculous inches long and 3 ridiculous inches wide, and they still had to be cut into pieces. Earl, Josephine, and Mr. Johnson had high expectations, but the Band-Aid boxes collected dust, ignored and unwanted. So the process to make these Band-Aids had to be done, each Band-Aid by hand by a person making them. And they were really big. And it was a really slow and long process. So now they have another problem they need to solve. A few years later, they invented a machine. And this machine could make thousands of bandages. Instead of having to cut them up, each one was made, ready to go. Band-Aids were now just the perfect size, 3 inches long and 1 inch wide, and they were cute too. Each one had a little red string to pull in order to open the paper wrapper. So you can see here in the picture, they invented a machine that could make each little Band-Aid like we know them. Success! Band-Aids flew off the shelves, the end. They keep trying to end this story, but this story isn't over. Not really. So even though they made the cute red string and the convenient size and they could make lots of them, the public wasn't sold on the idea. People weren't buying them. They didn't know what they were. Mr. Johnson knew there had to be a solution. What happened next was truly a stroke of genius. The company decided to give the Band-Aids away. Mr. Johnson wondered, who needs Band-Aids the most? All right, guys, who do you think needs the Band-Aids the most? Who do you know uses the most Band-Aids? Kids do, don't they? All that playing outside, right? Falling, fishing. So all of this rough and tumble playing with kids outside, there were lots of scraped knees and little bandages, so he decided to give them to the Boy Scouts. All those fall down, climb up, scratched elbows, scraped knees boys got plenty of cuts. It didn't take long before the mothers of those rough and tumble boys saw how handy the little bandages were. That did it. Earl and Josephine's invention was a smash. During World War II, the company sent millions of free Band-Aids to the brave soldiers fighting overseas. In the years that followed, Band-Aids were made in different sizes, colors, and designs. Some Band-Aids even had pictures of cartoon characters on them. And that continues to this day all over the world. From boisterous hot dog vendors in Brooklyn, fancy French winemakers, tired taxi drivers in Denmark, and English bobbies on bicycles, to daredevil skateboarders in Saskatchewan, king crab fishermen in Alaska, sweaty Ugandan soccer players, and applauding audiences at the Bolshoi Theater in Moscow. The sounds of "ah," "oh," "ouch" still echo, but not for long. Because soon those sniffles and sobs of pain are silenced by Earl and Josephine's accidental boo-boo invention. And that is the happiest ending of all. The end. Really. So these people had a problem. They kept getting cuts, and there were no such thing as Band-Aids yet to put on their cuts. So to take care of that, they invented the Band-Aid that would help take care of all the boo-boos and scrapes and scratches. But that wasn't it, was it? They still had the problem of how to make the Band-Aids, make enough that they could put them in boxes and sell them at the store. So then they had to invent a machine that could make Band-Aids super fast, and a lot of them, just the right way for people to buy them in the store like we do today. But that wasn't enough either, because people didn't know about Band-Aids. And so they didn't know that they could go to the store and get them. They were brand new. They'd just been invented. So the third thing they did to solve their problem and get Band-Aids to everybody was they gave them to moms. They gave them out for everybody with kids, the Boy Scouts, so that every time these kids would scrape their knees or their elbows or have little boo-boos and cuts, their moms could put the Band-Aids on. And moms everywhere soon really loved Band-Aids and realized that these Band-Aids solved their problems. Now that they knew what they were and that they could go get them at the store and how they worked, people started buying lots and lots of Band-Aids, and Band-Aids started coming in cool colors and sizes and all your favorite cartoons, right? We don't always think about it, but all sorts of things that we use every day, at one point, they were invented by somebody. And sometimes it doesn't just stop within one invention. Sometimes you have to keep working at it and keep solving all the different steps before you have a finished product.